You guys, we have the pleasure this morning of Linda Martella-Whitsett, and you've seen her before. You get to see her again, and I'm excited to hear her message, the audacity of forgiveness. How about that? Just real quick, a little bio here. New Thought author and Unity minister. You knew those things. She's going to always approach humanity's innate capacities with which to respond to life circumstances. And I have to imagine today is going to be yet another example of that. Linda's on the executive team at Unity World Headquarters, and a new book, Discover Your Divinity. How about that? Linda, please tell us what you will.
Well, it's a treat, always a treat when I'm invited to have a Sunday celebration along with you. So thank you. It's wonderful to see you all today. It's wonderful to be with you and to connect in this cyber field, right? In the Zoomosphere, to connect. And as is typical for me, I'd like to share a message that comes from my own inquiry, right? From my own dwelling in the questions. And I tend to look, beyond the standard answers only because they've never been very satisfactory to me. And so, again, it probably won't surprise you that I'm looking for this, what is this forgiveness all about? Why does it require audacity, or spiritual boldness? So I was thinking about how many processes we know of, and in New Thought we have been introduced to many different processes for the big forgiveness, right? The book Radical Forgiveness, for example. You likely have been introduced, as I have, to Ho'oponopono, which is based upon the wisdom of the Hawaiian kahunas. Byron Katie's The Work it is not specifically called forgiveness, but the work leads us to that, to the expression of, or to the freedom that is possible in forgiveness. And in recent years, the quantum living process, formerly the Q process, by Jane. I'm trying to think of their last name right now, but Gary and Jane Simmons have been teaching that for many, many years. And that includes like a daily worksheet. Like every night you sit down and look at if there's anything or anyone to forgive in your life. But there's something that dates all the way back to 1951, which isn't that long ago, really, from not in my lifetime anyway, from James Dillett Freeman. This was in a book of his that was published in that year called The Household of Faith. I want to read just some excerpts from this, and I have edited it for contemporary language, like to change the gendery kinds of things in here, and some of the references to the nature of God that he expresses in more anthropomorphic terms, sort of, right? So he says, here is a mental treatment that is guaranteed to cure every ill that flesh is heir to. Sit for a half hour every night and mentally forgive everyone against you whom you have any ill will or antipathy. If you fear or if you are prejudiced against even an animal, mentally ask forgiveness of it and send it thoughts of love. If you've accused anyone of injustice, if you've discussed anyone unkindly, if you've criticized or gossiped about anyone, withdraw your words by asking them in the silence to forgive you. If you've had a falling out with friends or relatives, if you're at law or engaged in contention with anyone, do everything in your power to end the separation. See all things and all persons as they really are, pure spirit, and send them your strongest thoughts of love. Never go to bed any night feeling that you have an enemy in the world. So, wow, no tall order, right? It's a tall order. I don't know about you, but as I was reading it, I could think of people and situations in my life that are present to me right now that I'm working on that level of, of achievement of that kind of freedom. But he goes on to say there's an immutable law behind this healing method, right? And that is divine love. Love is manifest as life, he says. And so he says, God is thus manifest in and through all creations. If we do anything to cut off the love of any person, we're cutting off the love of God. Hence, we're cutting off the life that flows through all of it. And he says, when we withdraw from others, when we do that, we cut the cords of love that bind us together. He says, at the same time, we sever the arteries and veins through which the universal life flows. In other words, we're choking off life if we fail to forgive, is sort of what I get from that, right? And then we find ourselves, he says, mere bundles of strained nerves, trembling and shaking with fear and weakness, and shriveling for the lack of divine love. But he says, omnipresent spirit, and I'm going to say this in my words, is an ever-flowing abundance of powers and principles within our nature that we can claim and quicken and develop. So, what I like about what he did was to say there's a method that he tells us right up front, but there's a law behind it. There's the principle, in other words, behind it. And so I've been really grappling with this in my own experience to say, why is forgiveness so hard, and what does it really ultimately mean for me? And so this is what I want to address this morning. And the very first thing I come upon, and maybe you do too, is the word forgiveness is problematic in our culture today. And the way we use the word forgiveness, it has so many connotations of letting someone else off the hook, of having to kind of sacrifice ourselves for the other person. And it really is about other persons, right? Forgiveness, I forgive you. It's about me and you. It's about me registering that you have done something. So forgiveness, though, I have to find other words, because for me, forgiveness is about me and the you that I have created in my own mind. Right? It's the you, it's the figment of you. It's the story of you that I tell myself. It's not ever really about me and you as you are. It's about me and my thoughts about you. So that's the first thing that for me I grapple with in forgiveness, is to be able to say to myself, I'm telling myself a story about you. It's not the whole of you. It's a construct of you that is filtered through my own feelings about what happened between us. And so what this speaks to me of is a word that comes from the Aramaic scholar Neil Douglas Klotz. Any of you studied Neil Douglas Klotz's work? He's a scholar of the Aramaic language who wrote a little pamphlet about the Lord's Prayer, and since has written and teaches about the original language of Jesus, which was Aramaic, and introducing shades of meaning about the words that have been translated into English and solidified as this is what it means. And one of the words that he uses in this, and if you remember, the Lord's Prayer is forgive those, right? Forgive those who have trespassed against me. And so I found this word from that treatment of the Lord's Prayer, and he translates that word forgiveness as untangling. Untangling. And I think about that, it makes so much sense to me. And he says that the ancient Aramaic and even the Semitic languages of today, when they're translated into English, a Western thinker will give that word a specific meaning, a Westerner's meaning, right? And so we lock it in and we say that's what it means. But in the Semitic languages, a word can have shades of meaning, and a variety of different meaning depend upon how it's used and what the actual intended message might have been. So I think about this idea of untangling. And then I think about, what do we say about relationships? We think of them as a bond. You know, we think about marriage or a committed relationship as getting hitched. We imply the two become one. We don't just imply it. I mean, it's said in the rituals oftentimes of marriage, the two become one. And, you know, I certainly know from a being in a many years marriage myself, that what ends up happening in relationship is we get all in each other's business. Right? We get all in each other's business. There's an enmeshment that can happen in the best of relationships, in friendships, in family relationships, whatever, right? But ultimately, love is meant to free. I think about David Roth's song, Rising in Love. Have you heard this? He sings, we're not falling, we're rising in love. He speaks about love being freeing and allowing each of us in a relationship of love to have the freedom of self-definition, of self-determination, and all of that. But there's no doubt there's cords of connection, the threads of the unifying love between us. And the more we are in relationship, the more of those threads of connection we build with one another. We build it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way it is in our human experience of relationship and love. But those cords of connection can get knotted and tangled. And that's where, you know, this whole idea of forgiveness comes in. That's where in the Lord's Prayer, forgive those who have offended me. Those threads can get knotted and tangled. So knots tightened through the years by repeated mistakes and failures, which I think of mistakes and failures as merely the misapplication of our spiritual powers, right? It's not willful. It's just we haven't skillfully used our spiritual powers. And so we build these knots that then are very difficult to disentangle. And to me, the process of forgiveness is, how do I disentangle these knots, these corded connections? And there's a couple of different knots that come to mind for me that really speak of our spiritual capacities, our powers, our 12 powers. The first of them for me, which is a big one in all communications, is the knot of misperception. Misperception. Now, perception is one of the aspects of our power of faith. So to me, the knot and tangle of misperception is a misuse of my power of faith. So, right? So misperception says, I have a book of evidence about you. Like, you always procrastinate, and then you fail to follow through on projects around the house. You leave me to pick up the slack. Well, that's what you are. You're a procrastinator. And that means you don't care about me. Can you hear the thread of that kind of conversation? It might not be spoken out loud, but it can go on in our heads, right? It can go on in the judgments we can find. And we have a whole book of evidence over time of this kind of pattern over and over again. Well, faith says, I perceive the truth about you, right? That's what faith, the perception, the perceiving power of faith is, I know your divine nature. And so when I apply my power of faith to this kind of circumstance, I'm reminding myself that I do know that you are divine. I know that I can trust, because that's another aspect of faith. I can trust that you and I can work out our differences because we trust the truth about each other. So I drop into the state of faith, and when I do that, I'm not contributing to the buildup of these knots of misperception. You hear that? And to me, that's a forgiveness process. That's me saying, I'm not going to let this build up, even though I'm telling myself a story that we have been here before, and here we go, right? I am going to instead drop into my power of faith, and I'm going to perceive the truth about you that goes beyond this circumstance, and I'm going to trust you and me, the love that is between us, the oneness that we are, to work this out in our circumstance, right? So that leads to the next knot or tangle, which is misjudgment. Now, judgment is a rightful use of our power of wisdom. Misjudgment is misusing the power of wisdom. So I can judge your motives negatively. I can become very suspicious minded. Say to myself, I know why you didn't show up for our scheduled lunch. You always disrespect me and our relationship. Even though later I might find out that you had to respond to a family emergency and you couldn't call me right at that moment because you were on the phone with emergency responders, right? Those kinds of things that can happen. But because I have had a history with you, I have misjudged what is taking place. Look, we do this on the road all the time with other drivers and such like that. It comes pretty without bidding. It's not that we want to do this. It's just one of the ways that humanly, we respond to our frustrations and such. So, but to become more conscious of it, that this is a tangle of, or a knot of misjudgment. And how can I use my power of wisdom in a more enlightened way? How can I tune into, more intuition rather than just looking at the appearance of what's going on in this situation? How can I untie that knot of misjudgment? And another knot is miscommunication. And to me, that's misusing the power of understanding, because the way I communicate has to do with what I'm believing about what's going on. When my husband and I, we've had this dance through the years. We've worked it out now, but by gosh, for years and years, it was me saying, but you said you didn't have a preference for where we were going to go out to eat, or where we were going to go and how we were going to spend our date night out. Well, he might respond, well, you asked me when I was in the middle of something and I was distracted. It would really help if you would ask, is this a good time to check in about our plans? Right? Simple miscommunication that we can zig and zag is what Giles and I have called this through the years, the zig and zag. But I can apply my power of understanding, which says I will listen in order to learn and comprehend. I will seek insight into this relationship, you see. And my ability to do that allows me to, first of all, not build up any continuing knots of miscommunication, but it also allows those knots of miscommunication to begin to disentangle. So forgiveness for me, I see as an untangling of these inner threads that have over time tightened into thick knots. That's why for me, probably for you too, forgiveness can take place over a period of time, one thread at a time. Many of you have heard me tell at least parts of my story about my dad. My dad and I, 9 years of disentangling those cords. It took me 9 years to return to my father and for him to return to me. It was no quick little determination on my part and then we're done. It was a stretch of time, and it was a practice of disentangling. And that meant, me really facing myself with all the ways I had misperceived what was going on for him, my judgments about him. It was willingness to see him differently. And it was changing the communication, being able to listen beyond what was being said to me, or in this case, not being said, because there was an absence of communication for many years. So for me, I love thinking about forgiveness in terms of untangling those knots. And I hope that has some value for you as well, if it makes it easier, because we have this presumption that forgiveness, we just say, I forgive you and I'm done with it. And you know that's nonsense, don't you? You know that doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way. But one thing we can do, and this is another way I think about forgiveness, is repentance. It's the power of release or negation, and it is what I would say a return to love, right? It's turning around. Repentance means to turn around. And so this is really enacting our true power of divine love, right? Magnetism, harmony, and unity. Because love sees you and I are not other to each other. And love acts as compassion and kindness, even in the face of these knots, these tangles. Love says it really ultimately doesn't matter what you have done or what I have imagined you have done. It doesn't even matter why. Now, that's a pretty lofty thing, but it comes after all the other work. For me, it comes after as I disentangle, I come to see it this way, right? In divine love. I come into the release of all that has been in the way of me being in harmony with you, right? So, and I see myself, if I could imagine that you have harmed me in some way, it's possible to imagine it because it's possible for me to harm. And I end up having to conclude that you and I are the same. I'm here condemning you, but I have harmed. My thoughts have been harmful at times. And I have to come to see that as part of the forgiveness process, you see. And really, I turn around, or I repent. I turn around to see you, to see myself truly as love, as unity, as oneness. In the state of love, then I can have an open heart, no condemnation. I can have untangled, disconnected those knots. And that means that, think about knots in the stomach. That means I'm freed of all the discord internally that has come from from my story that I've told about what's happened between us. Myrtle Fillmore wrote, "Forgiveness is not silent consent, the negative appearance of making the best of a situation while underneath there is resentment. She said, forgiveness is the art of putting something else in place of the thing forgiven. You put the positive realization of the truth of being in place of the negative appearance and adversity which your senses and your intellect report. It does not matter if there's no immediate transformation. You have made use of your divine power to erase the appearances and to establish the truth. Such an attitude only invites the best from others." To me, the result of all of this and what I strive toward, and why to me this is audacious, is because the process of entering into forgiveness frees me. It's a freedom. So let's meditate on freedom. I invite you to unite with me in a few moments to kind of digest all of this in a way that makes sense for you, and you take in that which feels life supporting to you, and just sit in your own posture for prayer. Feet on the ground, spine lengthened, relaxed and yet alert. And just breathe with an awareness that you're opening the crown of your head to the universal breath, the spirit. Just being an opening for breath that comes from beyond our physicality, from the atmosphere around us, not just the material atmosphere, but the spiritual atmosphere. Intelligence itself is flowing now into the crown of our heads, down into our heart, up from the earth into our feet, flowing up into the heart. And our breath out. Let your breath out generate from your heart, breathing out divine love that circulates throughout your body temple as a healing stream in your physical body, and just beyond the borders of your body as a stream around your aura, and beyond that as a stream that heals the world. Let's be all caught up in the freely flowing breath of life. The very demonstration of breathing is an enactment of the principle of oneness or unity. There's only one. It's one breath, it's one movement, it's one beingness. The truth of oneness sets me free. Just give yourself that mantra as an instruction, as a code of authority into your brain, into your body. The truth of oneness sets me free. That truth of oneness is, as Jesus said in so many words, the Father and I are one. I cannot be separate from my source. I can release the chains of imprisonment today. I can free myself from oppressive thoughts of unworthiness, limitation, lack, disease, separation. The truth of oneness sets me free. There's only one power. All authority has been given me. Divine love is the unifying power. Oneness. I am that power. I am unity. I am divine love. And let me dwell in the reality that I am one from within. I am one within myself, one with love, one with awe. And in that awareness of oneness, I see no other. Let's be still in that awareness, and in our own minds and hearts conclude the truth: I am love. I am one. The truth of oneness sets me free. And what is that truth that sets me free today? I know by the way that I feel whether I'm grounded in this truth that sets me free, free to be peaceful, free to be peace, free to be joyful, to be joy, free to be compassionate, to be love, free to be powerful, to be power, to express it, to embody it. So whatever you see is your freedom today, as you release, as you disentangle the knots of your own misperceptions, your own misjudgment, your own miscommunication. And as you intend to be free, just experience the appreciation of that shift in consciousness to assert freedom, to be willing now to flow in the peaceful, joyful, powerful reality that is my source. It's my true nature. It's what I am. It's what I embody, and therefore what I live or express. I am light. I am love. I am power. I am presence. I am divine. And so it is. So it is. Amen.